Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples. Right then, I haven't heard a bird all morning. I start this thing and one chirps, of course, right nearby. We had those turkey, but thank you for confirming that, by the way, in the comments. Turkey vultures yesterday that were hovering over me, looking down. They can obviously sense somebody in their end stages, and they're just waiting to see if they could get their beaks into me, and thank God they didn't. But yeah, we'll keep an eye out for them today, and hopefully I can get my composure and restart here. So anyway, it's a fine morning. It's not actually. It's humid as shit. It sucks as per usual, but I just did a weather report yesterday where things were a little better. Well, they're worse again, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to expound on it other than to say this is a traditional Florida, certainly Naples, Florida, July morning where the humidity is just shit and ruins your desire to go on and just leaves you in a fit of depression. And that's what I have going now. Having barely any sleep this week. I mean, God, I ramble on generally, but it's only going to get worse when I don't sleep, and compound it with the coronavirus whiskey, because apparently this Gamma Delta thing is out of control, and California is masking up again, as they're wont to do. And even though everything's, green lights here in Florida, I'm going to keep the whiskey going just to be safe. So there it is, quick intro, and we're going to get into this. This is great. This is incredible, and I have to give another tip of the hat to Uncle Johnny for this one. I mean, thank God I have this fellow in my life, because I'm getting some fantastic cars from it that otherwise I certainly would not. And this is one of them. This is a 1968 Oldsmobile Toronado. And it is just a fantastic vehicle all around, and I can't wait to get into it. Oldsmobile was a company, it's the oldest company, by the way. It's gone now, of course, in GM's eternal wisdom, it's gone. But it is the oldest car company in the United States, founded in the 19th century by a pretty fascinating cat named Ransom E. Olds. A very neat guy, and there's another video where I went on about the history of Mr. Olds and what he did and what he went through, and so instead of doing all of that, I'll just link to that video below and we'll get on with this one right away. He was forever memorialized, by the way, through REO Speedwagon, which was of course named for him. Can't speak to Air Supply or what they were up to, but anyway, he was a pretty neat cat, and he started a company, and it became a GM division, and then of course it went away at a certain point. The Toronado, and this was the first one. The name didn't actually start with Oldsmobile. It was an insignificant Chevy show car in, I don't know, like 1963 or 55 or something like that. It was purple. That was about the only thing you could say about it. But otherwise, the name Toronado was just something that was sitting on the GM shelf, and they decided to grab it for this car. They couldn't use Tornado because, of course, that was being used by the fighter jet company, and there were trademarks involved, so it just wasn't worth getting into it. 66 was a pretty friggin' amazing year for probably the United States as a whole, but certainly for GM. It was a heyday for GM. It was another time when they were at a pinnacle. The space race, the Cold War was going on. You had a bunch of smart guys with slide rulers and white shirts and buzzy haircuts, and they just were arrogantly building some really great stuff, and it gave them the balls to build this, which was a radical car when it came out in 1966. And I don't think it would have happened if there wasn't the sort of gung-ho, America fuck yeah attitude going on at the time that left the public a little bit more open-minded. I mean, you're talking about the telegraph wasn't that old, and now you've got rockets flying into space, so it was a pretty magical age for people then, and very fertile grounds for releasing something that was interesting. It was also a time when GM all of the brands had their own uniqueness to them. There was still a little bit of cross-platforming going on, but for the most part, each company had its own engineering department, its own styling department, and they would build Pontiacs for Pontiac people and Buicks for Buick people, and so on and so forth. Now, as we talked about yesterday, the personal luxury coupe had come out in the form of the Thunderbird in 1958, and even if that was a fairly unattractive car, I mean, really, honestly, it did sell extremely well, and it laid the ground. It showed that there was this big giant market for something that had been untapped, this personal luxury coupe market. So General Motors decided that they wanted to respond, but I think they were caught pretty flat-footed because it took them a while to do it. The Riviera was really the first true response in 1963, going on 5 years later. Well, you know, after the other companies and GM saw that the Riviera was doing pretty well and it was a neat car for them, they wanted in on the action. So they got some personal luxury coupes. It gets a little bit complex, but you know, this time I'm just not getting into all of that stuff. I will just say this. Cadillac got slated to have the Eldorado. They had earlier turned down what would become the Riviera, a LaSalle show car, and that was a mistake for Cadillac. They realized it, so they ended up coming up with a Riviera, an Eldorado that would come soon, but not till '67. Buick had the Riviera, and Oldsmobile wanted something to compete with them, and it got it. It got, you know, they were told they could have a Riviera Thunderbird class car, you know, in 1963 or so, so they had to start tooling up for it. Enter a guy named David North. He had drawn something called the Flame Red car, and it was purely an exercise. This was just something that, you know, engineers and designers do to kind of keep themselves fresh. So he drew this thing. It, you know, looked pretty cool. His concept was basically a four-door. That's the whiskey. His concept was basically a four-seat Corvette, you know, something small, light, nimble, very, very quick and cool. And it went down on paper, got filed away, and that was that. Well, when Oldsmobile found out they were getting a personal luxury coupe a few months later, that drawing came out, got entered into the contest, if you will, to see which design would win and get the nod, and it was that one. North's Flame Red car became the project that would become the Toronado, and I don't think anyone was more surprised than North himself. It's, I mean, it's just not what you expect, is your experimental hypothetical drawing ends up being designed into a car a few months later, but yeah, sometimes it works that way. But again, the DNA of this car was extremely influenced by the 55 Motorama show car called the LaSalle 2, which was a joint project taken by GM staff and GM styling, the engineering guys, to prove or disprove whether or not a big, heavy front-wheel drive car could work. And even though that thing never ran, I guess they did decide it could work because they went ahead with this one. There was a guy, Belts was his name, Larry Belts. Anyway, I just remember his name, Belts. He's the guy who made the 442, by the way, and he would later go on to head up Oldsmobile. Well, he was the guy from 1958 onward who was developing that front-wheel drive platform. And, man, that's what really makes God, there are birds going insane over there. It sounds like hundreds of them. Anyway, the front-wheel drive part is what made this car so radical when it came out. It was the first front-wheel drive American car since the Cord 810 and 812 in the 30s. Coincidentally, a car that Bill Mitchell liked, so we'll get into that and how it impacted this one. But you know, the public didn't know what the hell to do with it when it came out. I mean, it had this radical styling. I mean, this 68 is a couple of redesigns after the original, but it still shares most of what was radical about the first one. And it just looked badass, and it looked like nothing else that was out there. I mean, look at those giant wheel arches, big power flares that it has, almost like that Scat Pack wide body we had the other day. It's got a true fastback design going into a swooping deck, almost Firebird-like. I mean, there was just nothing else on the road that looked like this thing. But anyway, they start putting it together, and this is going to get kind of funny because you've got Bill Mitchell heading up the design team. They want to build it on the A platform. Does this sound like yesterday? Where it'll be a small, sporty, very cool piece. Somebody said this in the comment section. Why does GM always seem to be cost-cutting, you know, in your videos? They're always cost-cutting. Well, if I say cost-cutting, my apologies. It's not like GM's always in financial trouble and finding ways to be cheap. GM is a company, and has always been a company, where the accountants are at least as powerful as the engineers and designers, if not much more so. And GM brass listens to the accountants. And you know, at Mercedes-Benz, the accountants ran nothing for many, many years. They run the show now, but back, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, Mercedes-Benz were built to a standard, and the accountants be damned. And who cares what the car cost? It was about the engineering. That was never really the case at GM. I mean, every project that would become a production car had to go through the chopping block to see what it would be. And in this case, the accountants told Mitchell, again, after many fights, absolutely not. You're not getting your small, powerful, sporty Toronado. You're going to build it on the E platform that will be shared with the Riviera. So it had to become much, much bigger. And from what I understand, the flame car drawing basically stayed the same, but just became much, much bigger to fit the E platform. So anyway, that makes it not at all unlike that 71 boat tail we did yesterday, where that was sort of the crux of the whole thing. But whereas, honestly, that car was sort of compromised by making it bigger, by putting it on the B platform over at Buick. This car really wasn't. I mean, it held together perfectly. The styling held together perfectly. It was just in a bigger scale, but it was still as radical, as amazing, and as out of the park as, you know, anything that had ever been made. And it made a huge splash instantly with the buying public and with the car magazines. Motor Trend made it its car of the year in 1966. It was the only, that's when it meant something, by the way, and that was the only Oldsmobile ever to get that nod. The public started buying it up like crazy. GM, they said they could have sold 100,000 of them if production had kept up, but that fell off a cliff the next year, which we'll get into. The original 66 was also intentionally designed to give a nod to the Cords, the last front-wheel drive in the United States. It had pop-up headlights. It had a vertical grille in the, a horizontal grille, and that's been replaced on this one, but I'll put a picture of a 66 that was meant to be reminiscent of the Cord, and also the wheel covers, which this one has, by the way, which are also reminiscent of the Cord. If this one in 68 had gotten the disc brake option, it would have bigger wheels and not have that. But anyway, there were many intentional Cord references in the original car, which was, you know, it wasn't heavily what it was all about. It was more about the engineering. Again, Oldsmobile wanted people to think of the company as an engineering company, as a smart person's company. You know, Pontiac wanted the sporty alternative to Chevy. Buick wanted the more conservative approach to Cadillac. You know, people who wouldn't have felt right driving around a Caddy bought a Buick, and so on and so forth. Oldsmobile wanted to be thought of as the engineering company, where you know, people who were kind of intelligent bought the car. So anyway, it was going to share the platform with the Riviera, but there's going to be one big difference, and that is that the Toronado is front drive, and there's nothing else on the road like it. And that's all pretty cool, but we'll get into it. You see those knife-edged front fenders, that expanses of front hood, very short little rear deck, and a remarkably low roofline for what was essentially a big Luxo barge at the time. This was a very sporty-looking car, and frankly, women didn't like it. I mean, unless they were really sporty, racy women, you know, the kind you want to hang around. You know, your average housewife found this thing to be much too masculine and aggressive for her to drive. But the guy guys like that, and of course they bought it. And you know, what it had under the hood and what it had all around helped with that a lot. But well, I tell you what, anyway, let me pause for a minute. I'm going to wipe the sweat off my brow, defog my glasses, and then we're going to get specifically into this car. Alright, so let's keep rolling along. You see the twice pipes out the back. This car did have dual exhaust. They always did, you know, from the get-go, and of course that helps the big V8 breathe. There you see the fogged up back window. It's just what we're facing right now with the way that the July is with the humidity. There's just nothing I can do about it, so I'm not even going to fight it. Let's see if we can get inside the trunk. I left the keys in the car, but I know this car has a trunk release. Let's see if that works. And it does. That's fantastic. Okay, there you go. You see Uncle Johnny stores this with damp rid. Very, very clever. You know, not a huge trunk for the era, and certainly not for this being such a big car. But, you know, not a huge trunk for 1966 translates into an enormous trunk today. And there you go. So you got plenty of room to put all your crap in there. There you can see the original matching bias ply. And honestly, these are the first time that I've seen tires that look like this. I believe they're rumored to be the original tires on the car. I don't know if some Oldsmobile geek is going to come out and contradict that, but either way, I haven't seen anything like them, and they're friggin' amazing. I'll do a close-up of them on the car. But anyway, everything neat and proper under there. You can see it has the electric release. These cars were very well optioned at the time and nicely finished. This almost looks like something you'd find on a C-Ray, you know, that little trunk light. And, you know, all the wires running up into the deck lid because, of course, this was more than your standard Chevrolet. Do like the vents at the back of the window as well. These cars did have radically new ventilation systems that would, now where the hell is the hood release? I haven't actually looked for that before. I see the brake release. It's got to be under here somewhere. Oh, for the love of God, I knew I should. You know, it's usually so obvious on American cars like this vintage that I wouldn't have even thought it's an issue. Must have just a front release, not an interior one. Duh. Well, I feel stuff around here, but I tell you, let me pause it for a minute, for the love of God. Oh, God, well, I'm glad I didn't try doing with that. And look at the length of that hood. I mean, it is absolutely insane and extremely heavy, and that just would not have happened one-handed. And, you know, I've been reading about how it was a great thing from Oldsmobile that they were able to fit this front-wheel drive platform in a engine bay designed for rear-wheel drive. Well, give me a friggin' break. I mean, you could fit a locomotive engine in the front of this car. It just doesn't look like it would be that hard at all. But anyway, that guy John Belts, the engineer who would, again, I guess they're true to their word because he would later run Oldsmobile, he was working on this, and it was called the Unitized Power Package, UPP, and it was tested extensively. I mean, for like 7 years before this car came out, that thing was being tested. It was a big deal for GM under many different platforms. They even took an old Corvair and made it front drive based on the same stuff it had. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on down there. But anyway, they made this UPP. One of the engineering challenges was... You know, here, this is basically a rear-wheel drive car that's front-wheel drive. I mean, most modern front-wheel drive cars, even the ones at the time, of which some European cars were over here, like, you know, the Citroen or the Mini or whatnot, they were designed to be front-wheel drive cars with transaxles that were sort of all integrated. That was the problem with this car, was making this huge V8 go through a transaxle that could handle the power and run through a front differential that could handle the power. I mean, this is not a little Honda Accord with front drive. This is a friggin' 4,700-pound car. In this incarnation, 67, it has over 500 foot-pounds of torque. I mean, it is a monster. It'd spin the hubs off a Accord-style transaxle. So it had to be tough, and that's where the turbo hydromatic 400 400 came in, which of course is a bulletproof transmission designed to handle that. But how do you make it front drive? They were trying to come up with all kinds of gearing solutions and little mini drive shaft. None of it worked very well, and all of it seemed expensive until they figured out the chain drive. And what that was is actually, not much different from a bicycle chain. Coming out the rear of the sideways mounted, so I guess the side of the Turbo Hydra 400, going into this smaller but very, very tough front differential with two incredibly tough axle shafts. And the chain was a very big deal because it solved all these engineering problems and made it economically viable. But it would require, the chain itself had 2,200 parts. They called it the Hivo. And it was factory stretched and factory installed, and was, a very, you couldn't half-ass it. It had to be just absolutely perfect. And when it was perfect from the factory, it could handle all the power, all the torque, no issues, and proved to be very reliable and long-lived. And frankly, these cars are considered to be pretty damn reliable. Very, very few chain and transmission problems in them. So they did achieve what they wanted to achieve there. By calling this car groundbreaking, though, and a first, nobody else ever really used this system after that. It was kind of GM only, this chain thing, this big V8. But by the same token, cars became different. And just a few years later, all the manufacturers were running away from big block, dual exhaust, no gas mileage, powerful engines to something that would be a little bit more economical. So maybe it never really had a chance to catch on. But either way, there it is. In '66, it had a 425, which was rated higher than most other Oldsmobiles at the time. Put out Rocket 425, put out 385 horsepower. Also had a Quadrajet tuned to 800 CFM, which was, again, revolutionary at the time. Other cars didn't have that. In '67, that was still the same, the first 2 years. '68 came out this, the 455 Rocket. Now down 10 horse to 375, but up over 25 in the torque department to 510. And, if you wanted to, and I'm certainly not going to on these original tires or whatever they are, you could smoke them off the rims. They were just absolutely amazing. So, but anyway, that UPP, that Unitized power plant, was so reliable and dependable. Unchanged, it actually became the basis for that GMC motorhome that came out a few years later. And basically, as a subframe out of this car, they put it in a GMC motorhome, which is enormous and heavy, and it did a fantastic job motivating that down the road. So undoubtedly, the engineering in this car is unbelievable, and definitely has stood the test of time, at least in terms of its durability, if not in terms of being groundbreaking in a way that people would copy it. It was also used basically unchanged all through the 70s. It just went on for a very, very long time. And the TH400, by the way, became called the TH425 in this transaxle form, and it shared with the Eldorado, which came out in '67. But the Riviera, no. Even on the same E-platform, the Riv and Buick decided to stick with rear-wheel drive and kept going that way all the way through '79 until they all became, that was when GM said everyone's the damn same at that point. There was also a W30 option, of course, the hot rod version of some of these cars that put out horsepower. I think the '68 W30 had 400 horsepower and, of course, even more torque, but those are probably a little bit rare. It also had dual exhaust that came through the bumper. But this one here was good for 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds, which ain't bad for a big, heavy car. Then even only 1.8 gallons of gas to get there, so not too bad. Quarter mile was in the 16s. It used a torsion bar front suspension, which was, again, revolutionary and unique. Other American cars weren't doing that at the time, and it handled actually quite well. At the back, though, instead of anything independent, they used a pretty traditional leaf spring with a, basically a solid beam axle going across, although it did have two shock absorbers arranged in a weird way. And it was considered to be a very good handling car. Like its stablemate, the Riviera, at the time, which, you know, also got the same kudos. And that's, again, not easy to do when you're talking about a car that weighs pretty close to 5,000 pounds. The drum brakes, and here's a double thing we'll show, a triple thing, because first of all, look at those tires. That could be the coolest thing that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I wish tires looked like that today. They're Uniroyal Masters. Again, they're supposed to be the original tires on this 13,000 mile car, and I'm not going to argue with Uncle Johnny on that. This one, you could get disc brake. The brakes were eternally controversial in this car. When it came out in '66, it had four-wheel drums, and everybody, Consumer Reports said they're unsafe. They were fine for the first big panic stop, but if you were doing 2 or 3 in a row, the fade, they said, would become lethal, and the car would be all over the road and very hard to stop. Who knows? Probably true. So the next year they came out with a disc brake option, but from what I understand, that didn't really help the situation much anyway. So the brakes were one of the reasons that this car suffered some of the negative controversy that probably contributed to it not selling well. As first year was great, but all the way through 1970, not so much, and probably the brakes had something to do with that. Additionally, the magazines and other people said the tire wear was going to be insane. You'd run through a set of front tires in 10,000 miles. And I suppose, you know, again, you've got quite a bit of weight on the front of the car. Not only are the tires meant to grip and provide traction and acceleration and move the car down the road, but they're also required to steer the car. And when you steer the tires that are driving the car, you just exponentially increase the stress on them. And that, of course, was probably tough on a 14-inch bias ply. But there you see those very cool caps, and they are the ones that wouldn't have been on the disc brake car, but would be on the ones with the drums, and they are the ones that are extremely reminiscent of the Cord 810, which apparently Mr. North had pictures of on the wall when he was designing and working on this car. So, you know, just kind of neat. I love the way that chrome bumper wraps around in the front, and of course the hidden headlamps behind now that honeycomb grille. Earlier this morning I did use a tripod and actually run the headlights. I'm tired of not being able to do that, so I brought a tripod with me, and I will either have already put them in at the front of the video, you know, you never know what you're going to do, or I'm going to pause right now and put them in here. So there it is. We'll see. We'll leave that up to how it goes. Again, scrolling down the side, the incredible wheel humps, you know, just looks like something out of the modern era with Chrysler and all these Hellcat things. Beautiful vinyl top, absolutely stunning. I love the little rocket marker lights at the back, the flush, basically, bumpers that are built in with the weird little panel at the back. I mean, this was an extremely modern car at the time, and I can tell you now, when I drove it home yesterday, you know, I've driven home a lot of these old cars, the Firebird, even that Riviera yesterday. Nothing garnered more attention than this car when I drove it home. I could see people snapping pictures at the light behind me. I had couples rolling down their windows asking me about it at stoplights. People are enamored of this thing. The styling is just that unique and impactful even today. I mean, it is just an undeniable classic in a way that a lot of other cars. This is, you know, here you go. Bill Mitchell hit it with this one. You know, this was his classic in a way that Bowtail Riviera tried to be and pulled off over time. But this was an instant success in terms of styling. Even if, you know, as time went on, the broads thought it was a little bit too masculine for them. So, all in all, pretty cool stuff, and very, very interesting to look at. So let me get the hood back down. Again, I'm going to pause it for a second. I know I do a lot of pausing these days, but it's just good to dry off. And then we're going to hop in the car. In fact, I'll get all my crap in there, get ready to go. We'll just hop in, do the inside, and then go for a spin. All right, let's do it. Again, the lines of this car, you know, it's finished in that desert tan color, very similar to that that 64 Corvette, the Stingray, the mid-year car we did last week, with a matching top and interior, and I just think it's absolutely stunning. And I can't imagine it without any other tire set on it now, with these weird little rectangular white walls. They're just the coolest thing that I've seen. I also can appreciate this, where that Buick yesterday had the gas door behind the license plate way down low, meaning, and somebody pointed this out in the comments, that the old guys weren't pumping their own gas in 1971. They had attendants doing it for them, so who cares if it's down low? That's kind of interesting shit. But anyway, Oldsmobile is being nice to the attendants, and they put in a gas door right up where you can get at it. You don't have to bend over. Nice and easy, and very proper. So I thought that was all very cool. Little Toronado by Oldsmobile. Badge there, and of course the taillights integrated into the bumper. But let's get inside the car. I will say this real quick. You see that it has, again, it's a pillarless coupe, a hardtop coupe. None of the windows have frames around them. The front and rear windows both go down. So when they do, you get this big, long, expansive side. And that's a GM design feature going back to the 40s. And also one that was basically done away with by the safety standards that came in as years went on. And there needed to be more structure for rollovers. That was those colonnade cars, or whatever the hell you say it. That came out in the 70s, and started the whole brand engineering thing. Even sharing platforms with the Riv, this car definitely had its own unique feel to it. I will also say this, the second gen Riv it was the start of GM decontenting the interiors, or at least making them more corporate, more across the lineup. And there is a distinct difference between the first gen Riv and second gen Riv on the interiors, and how, frankly, the second gen Riv looks a lot more bland than the first does. The first is much more of a halo car interior, which is quite cool and unique. This one, I think Oldsmobile did a better job of making this car look unique inside. Now remember, they're trying to market this car to cool cats who want to be the first in their neighborhood with something unique and different and weird. And the front wheel drive thing was going to do that, but the styling had to match the car. It had to match that. So when they pulled up somewhere, it wasn't just, oh, that's a normal looking car with front drive. No, the whole thing was a unique package of being a cool, sharp, forward looking bit of engineering. And that's partially why the low roof line is there, that swooping back, the swooping deck. And I think also they did make the interior look very cool. I like the little buttons on the door panel, the little grab handle, the Toronado logo. This one has the Strato bench seat, as most of them did, and there's a reason for that. Obviously, you could get the Strato buckets with the full-length center console. Very few people went for that, because one of the main advantages to having a front drive car was having a flat floor in your passenger compartment. No transmission hump. None at all. And that, it's, I can't remember what magazine, they called it a 3+2, not a 3+3. You could definitely fit 3 guys across the front. Your front passenger didn't have to straddle the hump, which was neat about the flat floor thing. But in the back, if you're going to have 3 people back there, it's going to be a little bit tight. Although it does have better legroom than that Riviera did yesterday. And the speakers are going to be pumping right out into your your center Canadian's head. But yeah, anyway, there it is. You can fit 3 in the back. Not much room for toddlers up on the package shelf, and it's swooped down. It's angled down, so they're just going to roll off, never mind when you brake. And there were some complaints about the rear headroom in these things, that style had overcome form. That style had overcome function, and was more important than giving headroom to your rear seat passengers. I completely agree with that, because who the hell cares about rear seat passengers? They can do what they're going to do. Like the little push button seat release, and the steering wheel is very interesting as well, with 2 spokes and then almost like an afterthought added spoke. It's just kind of strange. Anyway, let's hop in and let's hear that. I'm going to leave the door open. We'll hear this 455 fire up. I've got the AC on, not the AC, the defrost. Listen to that thing rumble. And again, being a low mileage car, the mufflers still have most of their material in them, so as time would go on, this would get much more rumbly. And I imagine a lot of guys just added, you know, turbo mufflers to it to really make it sound vicious. But nice V8 sound coming out of the twice pipes in the back. Let me get the windows down. Got a little AC going. I try not to run the AC in these older cars, even if it works, because even back then when they were new, it was a little bit sketchy with the overheating and the air conditioning. The instrument cluster in this car is fascinating and very space age. I mean, it looks like the control panel at Mission Control at NASA, and that's very much intentional. It's got this bizarre slot machine style speedometer. You see it goes up to 130 where the numbers roll down in a barrel, and you know, it's definitely form over function. It's really not that easy to see or tell how fast you're going, but it is incredibly friggin' cool and looks neat. You've also got this Climatic. They were very proud of this Oldsmobile. This was a $500 option, this climate control system, all push button. You just slid the temperature to where you wanted it, pushed whatever it is, you know, air condition. Oh, you're hot, put air conditioning on. You're cold, put heat on. Piece of cake. It's nice out, do nothing, and it worked very well. There's all these weird switches that look like they're off a Frigidaire. I actually had, and they're not, you know, immediately intuitive. How do I know I'm supposed to pull this for the headlights? Well, I had to figure it out, and it was scary because I don't want to pull a knob off. But yeah, it's a pull for headlights, and of course the dimmer is the twist. You get those two chrome switches. That's your wipers and your washers. All very nice stuff. This one has a tilt wheel, which is lovely, and also a telescoping wheel, which honestly I always felt like more of a Corvette option, but of course it was in all GM cars. But anyway, very, very neat stuff. You could really option these things out. If you went nuts in '68, the year of this car, you could have one costing over $7 grand, which was a heap of money back then. There you see just 13,000 miles on the clock on this car. That's real. Instead of a fancy radio like that Riv yesterday, this one just has the AM, and it's beautiful. I mean, look at the style of, I mean, the styling of these cars, man, is so, I mean, this is an AM radio and it's gorgeous, and I wouldn't want anything else. It's just beautiful to look at. Anyway, here's your electric antenna, which I believe works. Yeah, it does. Everything works in this car. Your courtesy lights, you've got a lighter here. What a beautiful lighter. I imagine that's going to be easy to find if you're missing a part. And of course, the prerequisite wood grain that you get when you have whatever the hell it is, what you need in a luxury car of sorts. I haven't actually found an ashtray yet to look at, so I don't know if this thing didn't have one or if it's missing. It had to have had, well, I guess it's right here, isn't it? It just seems like you got a bigger ashtray in these cars, and this would be like an ancillary ashtray if you wanted to smoke a second cigarette while you were smoking the first one. You got a glove box here with stuff in it, and the trunk release, which was also an option. And this bench seat is power. As was the style at the time, the owners of these cars, I don't know if they would forget their names or if they're just used to having plaques on their desks. They wanted them in their cars. So Daniel S. Moran decided that he was going to commemorate his owning this car with having a plaque facing the passengers to let them know who they were riding with, because they may not have already known that. Daniel needed to make sure they did. And once people put these things on, generally speaking, you don't pull them off because you probably take half the dash with it. You just never know what they use to put it on. So, yeah, you just let it go. I might put one of those little labels over the top of it that says, you know, shut up, hold on, sit down, put your belt down, whatever it is. Maybe just no smoking. You've got your original sun visors up there, headliner, lovely little integrated mirror going into a swoopy thing. Yeah, it's just really pretty. And of course this column-mounted shifter for that Turbo Hydra. Oh, before I forget, here's what I wanted to point out about this incredibly wild instrument cluster. It doesn't actually have any instruments in it. It has one. It has the fuel gauge, and I guess you could call the speedometer an instrument, but otherwise it's all flashing lights and I mean, you've got your temperature, oil pressure generator, you've got your turn signal lights, probably some kind of high beam lights here. I don't know what that light is, and I hope I don't see it. Maybe stop engine. I heard they had that. And, you know, it's this incredibly complex, stacked, wildly over-engineered instrument cluster, and there's barely a damn instrument to be seen. You also have a fan control over here, which is cool. And that vent in the center dash up high is really odd. Really, really odd. All right, again, I'm going to pause it so you don't have to wait for these slow gates, and I'll pick it up when we hang a right. I am not going on the highway in this car. It's got bias ply tires, for Christ's sake, which are reported to be from 1968. No thanks. Not looking to have a catastrophe this morning. We're just going to very gently cruise this one. So we'll pick it up again at the end of the road. So that is it. That's what you guys are getting for power and acceleration. Again, I'm living in terror of these tires. And after I had that Cadillac DeVille fiasco, right about over there, by the way, I'll post a link to that video so you can see how miserable it is getting a flat tire in an old car. I'm just going to cruise this car. And frankly, more than any of the cars that I have driven in the past couple of years, I enjoy cruising this one. You know, by 68, they had softened the suspension. It went from being sporty-er to less sporty because they didn't want to give up the cushy ride market to Buick or, you know, Cadillac. Oldsmobile still had to have that, so they desprung it. They did have a performance suspension option that went back to the originals, but for the most part, this was much more softly sprung. And I can dig that, man. It is a beautiful cruiser. It is just so lovely to motivate this thing down the road. Look, this is the wrong place. Looking out over that long, expansive hood, you know, you get terrific visibility, and a big V8 under the hood. I don't know. I mean, to me, this is just such an epic car, and really a fun one to drive. You know, that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to ramble on and on and on. I've rambled enough. So there it is. 1968 Oldsmobile Toronado. First generation, one of four. They made them through 92. Basically always shared a platform with the Eldorado and the Riviera, more or less. And, you know, the end of a pretty cool era, I have to say. The Toronado was a very special car, and I think this first generation is always going to be remembered as groundbreaking and an eternal classic. So, Cordoba, again, promise coming up. It is still coming. We'll get some other stuff. I have a Mercedes CL coming up, and, you know, somebody said I should review one of the Maseratis we got down there. I don't know. After the last Ghibli review, I'm not sure I want to do another one. I don't think it'll be able to win my heart. But thank you for having a look. Really appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care.